Hello and welcome to another Active Reach technical tutorial video. Today I'm going to have a look at VLANs. I want to create multiple VLANs and multiple DHCP pools on a layer 3 switch and show you how that's done. So this is quite a common network design these days, where you have the switch operating at layer 3, which means it carries out the inter VLAN routing for multiple VLANs, DHCP server somewhere on the network, and this will be the main gateway. There'll be an internet gateway here somewhere, which isn't part of this lab, but essentially this is the inside network. Layer 3 switch doing the inter VLAN routing and acting as the gateway. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do. We're using a Cisco Switch, which is a 3560, and as our DHCP server, I'm just going to be using a Cisco router, which is a Cisco 1921. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to configure these routers with enough information to talk to each other. So let's start with the router. I'm going to go into configuration mode. The router is connected to the switch on gigabit 00. Yep, on 00. So let's configure that interface. And we are going to give it IP address according to our diagram. It was 10.50.50.200 because it's going to be the DHCP server. And that's with a /24 mask. Okay, that's all we need on there for now. And then let's configure the switch. We're going to create VLAN. We're going to call this VLAN 50. So let's create VLAN 50. That just puts it into our VLAN database. And then we need to create a interface VLAN 50 with IP address 10.50.50.254, same mask. And we need to put the interface that is connected to the router into that VLAN. So that is I think it was 05. There we go, which you can see is up. We just need to place that into VLAN 5. The other interface that's up is the interface that's connected to this machine, which at the moment you can see is not picking up any IP address. In fact, let's just disable that for a second. Just ignore the wireless, that's just on a different network, nothing to do with this lab. So here we go, the wired Ethernet adapter is now disabled. We'll re-enable that when required. Right, so we need to configure gigabit Ethernet 05, and we're going to put that into switch port mode access, switch port access VLAN 50, and let's put on spanning tree port fast as well. Okay, we should now be able to ping our router. They are both now able to talk to each other with a bit of luck. Let's see. $10.50.50.200. $10.50.50.254, and let me just check the VLANs on here. VLAN 50, port 5 is in VLAN 50. VLAN 50 is up. 10.50.50.254. 10.50.50.200. Try and ping it from here. 10.50.50.254. You can spot the mistake. What have I done wrong? It started responding now. Oh, I gave it 200 instead of 250, did I? Yes, sorry. Okay, so there we go. We've got connectivity between our DHCP server router and our switch. So that's the first stage. So now I'm going to create a pool on the router for the IT pool, for the VLAN 50. So let's go into conf mode, and we're going to do IP DHCP pool. Let's call this IT pool. It's an easy. And we make sure the network exactly matches the network for the VLAN. Otherwise, when the data comes across from the switch, it won't find the matching pool and it won't work. So this has to be exactly the same. That's the network we're on, 5050 with a /24. And the default router will be the IP address of the switch, which is going to be 10.50.50.254. And let's get some DNS servers. Okay. And if we go back to our switch now, if I put this machine's port, which is port 3, into VLAN 50, we should get an IP address. Let's give it a go. So switch port mode access, switch port access, VLAN 50. Let's do spanning tree port fast. And let's re-enable the Ethernet adapter on this machine. And then go into here and do an IP config. At some point we should see an IP address get picked up. And there you have it. We've now been assigned 10.50.50.1 and the gateway is 10.50.50.254, which we should be able to ping. There we go, just one time out and then it responded. And we should also be able to ping the DHCP server. And in fact, if we do an IP config/all, we'll see that the we're looking at this one here, we can see that the DHCP server is that server there. So we know that that's worked, and if we want to verify further, we can do a show IP DHCP bind, and we'll be able to see that leased address. So far so good. So let's create some more VLANs now. So let's change the switch, and let's create the VLAN 30. So VLAN 30, we're going to go interface VLAN 30. We're going to give it an IP address. 10.30.30.254, same on a /24 subnet. Let's give it a description. And this was our voice pool. Okay. And let's change the port that we're connected to, which was 03. Let's change that to switch port access VLAN 30. There we go. So just to confirm that, we now have VLAN 30, which is port 03 is the only port in that one, and VLAN 50. So this machine is now on that other VLAN. Let's just see what happens to our IP address. Nothing's happened at the moment, but if we disable and then re-enable, now it won't pick up an IP address obviously because we haven't configured the pool, so let's quickly do that first. So we're going to create a new pool. So it's the exact same commands, except we're on a different subnet and we're going to give it a different name. Okay, so hopefully the commands are in here. Here we go. Let's call this one voice pool. Let's give it a network. So this one was 30. And let's give it some DNS as well. Okay. Oh, and the router. Same again, except 30. Okay. And let's re-enable that. Let's just check our config here quickly. There we go, we've got our two pools in here. We've got the IT pool, which we know works, and we've got the VoIP pool. And in switch 1, yep, that all looks fine. And that all looks fine. Okay. No luck here. Now you see it hasn't worked. So why is that? Now the reason that is because these two switches, the switch and the router were communicating on 10.50.50.254 and 10.50.50.200. So when the DHCP pool is in that same range, and when an access port is in VLAN 50, communication will work automatically between these devices. But when we introduce a new subnet, as we've done, when the data hits the switch in that VLAN, it's unable to find the DHCP server. What we need to do is we need to configure a helper address on the switch to be able to send the data across to the DHCP server. So to do that, we need to add it to the VLAN in question. So we go into conf mode, we go into the VLAN for VLAN 30, and we add IP helper address. And then we tell the VLAN where to find the DHCP address, the DHCP server. So now, when the data hits this, it will know to send it on. There's one other thing that we've forgotten though. There's one other thing. On the server, we need a route back to this switch. So as this is a router, we don't have a route by default. If this was a normal DHCP server, like a Windows Server machine, then it would be configured probably with a gateway back to the switch, so you wouldn't need to add this. If we had a default gateway, then it would just follow the default route back to the switch. But at the moment, we've got no route at all. And in fact, this router could have a default route somewhere else entirely. So if we go into conf mode and we add IP route 0.0.0.0.0.0.0.0, we could send that back to the switch, which is 10.50.50.254. Or we could send the default route somewhere else if that was our default route, and we could add a route specifically for the new VLAN, which would be 10.30.30.0, and then 255.255.255.0. Or is it a wildcard mask it needs? I think it is just a normal mask for routes. But we're going to add it as a default route. So we're going to add 0.0.0.0.0, and this is going to be our default route, and we're going to point that to 10.50.50.254. Any data that now comes into the router, if it needs to make a routing decision, it's going to send it back to the switch. Okay, so that should mean DHCP will hopefully work for this machine. Let's give it a try. We enable that. I'll just quickly verify our configurations here. Okay, so we've got the VoIP pool, we've got our Ethernet, our gigabit Ethernet interface, we've got the route in here, we've got our helper address. Let's just check our VLAN configuration. Helper address is there, and if we go back to here, see if we've got an address yet. Okay, now you see we have a 1030 address, and if we go to our DHCP server and we do a show IP DHCP bind, you can see that it's leased the 30 address. The 50 address is still there in the lease table because it hasn't expired yet. We don't need to worry about that. We are now going to add the final pool, which is going to be the data pool. So let's do the same thing again. We are going to go into conf mode. We are going to create a pool. We're going to call this one data. And we're going to give it a network. We are going to give it a default router address. And we're going to give it some DNS addresses. And that is all we need. And we're going to go to the switch, and we are going to create new VLAN, which is 40, and we are going to create an we're going to go into interface VLAN 40, the new VLAN. We're going to give it a name. We are going to give it an IP address. And if we wanted to put an interface into this one, let's just say we're going to put 04. And in fact, let's put 03 back in there again, which is our devices. The port we're connected to. Oh, we've got our helper address. Let's go back in and just add that in. Helper address. Sometimes it's just quicker to type it, isn't it? 10.50.50.200. Okay, and then we want to go into interface VLAN 40, and we want to, no I don't, I want to go into interface 03. And I want to change that to switch port access VLAN 40. Okay, and now if I disable this, re-enable it, this should go into give it a minute. And now we can see that we picked up 10.40.40.1. and we can verify that from the DHCP server. There we go, there's our least address. These two are still active, but not actually assigned to anything, which you'll be able to see when you're able to ping those. 10.40.40.1 should respond. In fact, it should work the other way around. It is probably blocking us from the firewall or something. Let's just try it this way. And 200. Oh, is that right? 10.40.40. No, of course, that's, sorry, 10.50.50, 200. Probably won't work because I'm in the wireless now, so forget that. But we can see we can reach the switch. We should be able to reach that. Oh, the reason we can't reach it from the router is just because the default route on this machine will go out through the wireless and get confused. So just forget that. But we'll be able to ping it from the switch. It'll be 10.40 because these two are directly connected. .1. Okay, so we can see that that works. So that's basically how to configure a layer 3 switch with multiple VLANs and a DHCP server serving all of those VLANs, and making use of the IP helper address to ensure that we can do that. We could configure this as a trunk. This could be a trunk, and we could configure an IP address in each VLAN on the DHCP server instead of doing it that way, if you wanted to. No real need to do it that way. And the other thing that you've got to bear in mind as well is that IP routing should be enabled on the switch with the IP routing command. We don't need it for this lab because we never actually forced the switch to make routing decisions outside of the VLANs that were configured. But if you wanted the switch to be acting as a true layer 3 switch, then IP routing would need to be enabled. There's a few other commands that are worth having a look at on here. For instance, if you did a show IP interface VLAN 30, then you can see the helper address will show in there and the internet address will show in there. That one's showing is down at the moment because we don't have anything connected on VLAN 30. We're connected on VLAN 40 though, and you'll see that the line protocol will be up for that one. And if you take out the IP address for one of the VLANs, so let's go into VLAN 30 and let's say no IP address, sorry, interface VLAN 30, no IP address, then go back and run that command again, you can see internet protocol processing is disabled, so you can't make use of the helper address on an interface that doesn't have an IP address. It has to be IP enabled, routing has to be enabled. So typically you wouldn't do this on a layer 2 switch. It's just for switches that are operating at layer 3. And of course other devices and routers can have an IP helper address where required. Anyway, I hope that has been useful. Thank you very much for watching.